The Great War is still raging across Europe, and for Captain Hastings, the conflict has taken a temporary toll. We find our narrator recovering from his service at Styles Court, a sprawling, somewhat gloomy estate in Essex. It is the home of the wealthy and formidable Mrs. Emily Inglethorp, a woman who has recently remarried. Her new husband is Alfred Inglethorp, a man much younger than her, and much to the chagrin of her family. The atmosphere at Styles is thick, with a kind of quiet, simmering resentment. John Cavendish, Mrs. Inglethorp's stepson, and his brother Lawrence are clearly unhappy about the marriage, viewing Alfred as nothing more than a gold digger. To make matters more tense, Evelyn Howard, the family's longtime companion, has openly expressed her contempt for Alfred, eventually leaving the house in a fit of protest. There is even a sense of unease surrounding a mysterious doctor named Bauerstein, who has been seen in the village, adding a layer of suspicion to an already fractured household. Then, the tension breaks into violence. One night, the household is jolted awake by the sounds of Mrs. Inglethorp suffering through agonizing, violent convulsions in her bedroom. The door is locked from the inside. When the door is finally opened, the scene is grim. Despite the presence of the family doctor, Dr. Wilkins, the symptoms are unmistakable to anyone who knows medicine. This was strychnine poisoning. In the chaos, a few things stand out. Alfred Inglethorp was not in his bed when the crisis began, and the victim's final, strangled cry was her husband's name. Sensing that this is no simple case of a failing heart, calls upon his friend, a man who has recently arrived in England as a refugee from the war, Hercule Poirot. Poirot is a man of small stature, but he possesses a mind that functions with the precision of a Swiss watch. He doesn't care for the messy, frantic searching that the local police, led by the earnest Inspector Japp, tend to favour. Instead, he relies on his little grey cells, looking for the tiny, logical inconsistencies that others overlook. Poirot begins to pull at the threads. He notices that the timeline of the poisoning doesn't quite match the symptoms. If the poison had been in the evening cocoa, the reaction should have happened much sooner. He finds a box of unlabelled sleeping powders in the victim's room and discovers a crumpled, cryptic envelope tucked away in Alfred's desk. As the investigation deepens, the evidence against Alfred seems to pile up. A local chemist, Mr. Mace, testifies that Alfred had recently purchased strychnine, even though Alfred insists his signature was forged. The inquest is a turning point. The verdict is returned, willful murder by an unknown person. The police are convinced Alfred is the killer. He has the motive, he has the poison, and he has the opportunity. But Poirot remains unconvinced. He tells Hastings that the evidence against Alfred is actually too perfect. It's too convenient, too neatly laid out. He begins to suspect that someone is trying to make Alfred look guilty in a way that would eventually lead to an acquittal rather than a conviction. This leads him to consider the possibility of a disguise. Someone was seen at the chemist's shop wearing Alfred's distinctive black beard and glasses, but Poirot begins to wonder if that person was actually Alfred at all. The investigation takes a sharp, unexpected turn when Poirot suddenly exonerates Alfred. He claims to have found proof of an airtight alibi for the very time the poison was allegedly purchased. This bombshell throws the entire investigation into chaos. If Alfred didn't buy the poison, then who did? And if he's innocent, who is the real killer? The focus shifts heavily toward the Cavendish family. Poirot discovers that Dr. Bauerstein was not a murderer, but a spy, which clears one suspect, but then he finds something much more damning. He finds Lawrence Cavendish's fingerprints on a bottle of strychnine in a hospital dispensary. The pieces seem to fall into place against John Cavendish. The prosecution's theory is that John, facing financial ruin and desperate for his inheritance, disguised himself as Alfred to buy the poison and then destroyed a new will that would have left him less money. The drama moves to the Old Bailey, where John Cavendish stands trial, facing the very real possibility of death by hanging. The case against him is built on circumstantial evidence that feels nearly insurmountable. But just as the trial reaches its peak, Poirot has a sudden, brilliant epiphany. He realizes that the murder was far more ingenious than a simple case of spiking a drink. He returns to the scene to explain the mechanics of the crime, and it is here that the true genius of the killer is revealed. The strychnine wasn't just dropped into a cup of cocoa or a bowl of soup. Instead, the killer used a bit of chemistry to hide the poison in plain sight. The killer added bromide powders to Mrs. Inglethorp's regular medicine. When the bromide was mixed with the strychnine, it caused the poison to precipitate or settle at the bottom of the bottle. This meant that while the first few doses of the medicine were harmless, the final dose, the one taken right before bed, contained a concentrated lethal amount of strychnine. It was a delayed action murder, designed to look like a sudden, unexpected medical crisis. With the method revealed, the culprits finally come into the light. They are Alfred Inglethorp and Evelyn Howard. They aren't just allies, they are secret lovers. Their plan was a masterpiece of criminal manipulation known as a manufactured truth. They didn't want to just get away with the murder. They wanted to ensure that even if they were suspected, they could never be convicted. By planting evidence that made Alfred look incredibly guilty, the forged signature, the appearance at the chemist, they were setting him up for a legal trap. They knew that if the evidence was strong enough to point to him, but then an alibi was produced that proved he couldn't have done it, he would be acquitted. They were using the legal system to create a shield of innocence. Evelyn, using her medical knowledge and her ability to move through the household unnoticed, had orchestrated the timing and the chemical trickery. And the plan nearly worked. It only fell apart because of a change in Mrs. Inglethorpe's routine and a misplaced letter that disrupted their carefully timed sequence of events. Poirot reveals that he allowed the trial to proceed, even when it seemed he was letting an innocent man, John Cavendish, walk toward the gallows because he needed to see the full architecture of the crime before he could dismantle it. When we look back at this debut novel, it's easy to see why it changed the landscape of detective fiction. It introduced us to the idea that the most obvious suspect might be a distraction, and that the most clever criminal doesn't just hide their tracks, but actively builds a false path for the police to follow. There is a fascinating theme here of appearance versus reality. Throughout the book, everyone is wearing a mask. Alfred plays the part of the hated, suspicious outsider, while Evelyn plays the part of the loyal, indignant companion. Even the physical disguises, the beard and the glasses, serve as a metaphor for the way the characters present themselves to the world. The crime itself is a triumph of scientific misdirection. It's not just a matter of who had the motive, but who understood the chemistry of the crime well enough to hide the weapon inside the victim's own medicine. Agatha Christie was playing a high-stakes game with her readers here. She was testing the limits of the Golden Age mystery, where every clue is a piece of a puzzle. In The Mysterious Affair at Styles, she shows us that the puzzle isn't just about finding the missing piece, but about realizing that some pieces have been intentionally placed to lead you in the wrong direction. The resolution brings a sense of restored order to the Styles estate, but it leaves us with a lingering thought about the nature of truth. In the world of Hercule Poirot, truth isn't just what you see or what people say, it's what remains when you have accounted for every logical possibility, including the possibility that the truth is being actively manufactured to look like a lie. It was a perfect introduction to a character who would go on to solve dozens of cases, always reminding us that even the most obvious truth might just be a very well-crafted deception.